Hey, UCC Youth, it's Pastor Jennifer, and I got to tell you, I heard about the questions you were asking in Karen's class last week. Fantastic questions. So she asked me if I would give a go at answering some of those questions myself, and so here we go. First question. Do we have scientific proof that Jesus walked the earth? Well, I'll tell you what, scientific proof, a little hard to come by. However, we do have historical evidence that Jesus was on earth and was crucified, and that came from a fellow who was a Jewish philosopher and historian named Josephus. And he was generally considered to be pretty reliable about historical things that happened during his day. So we have independent corroboration that, yes, in fact, Jesus was a historical person who walked the earth. Second question, was Jesus really dead in the tomb? Yes. When in a word, really, absolutely dead, for sure, dead. Now, where we get into some questions is what people think about the resurrection. Was there a physical resurrection, or did Jesus' friends and his disciples kind of tell a story about him living more metaphorically? And for me, I believe in a physical resurrection. That's because I think God is so amazing, there's nothing God can't do. Other people have a hard time with that idea and think of the resurrection as being more of a story, and that gives them hope. But I tell you what, I think that whenever I start to limit the power and the range and the scope of God's love for us, I'm speaking about my own limitations, and I never want to limit God's love. So, yeah, I believe in a physical resurrection. Does that mean everybody has to? Of course not. Of course not. But I would just continue to invite you to explore that question because, again, we don't want to limit the power of God. Next question. Why is Jesus always depicted as a white man? Oh my goodness, I can't tell you how happy I am to get this question because he's not always depicted as a white man. In fact, in a lot of cultures, particularly around cultures in Africa, particularly in cultures of Asia and Latin America, Jesus is portrayed as a man of those people. So we have Black Jesus, and we have Asian Jesus, and we have indigenous Jesus, and we have all of these other depictions of Jesus. I've also seen depictions of Jesus as Christa. So we've got Jesus Christ and Jesus Christa, so a feminine form of Jesus. And that relates to another question that you had listed. Why is there only one Jesus? And that's a really great question. You see, because Jesus, as a man of his time and place, had a very unique relationship with God and claimed the title Son of Man, not necessarily Son of God. But as we read in the letters of Paul, all of us are sons and daughters of God. Now, Jesus realized his Christhood in a very unique way, but there have been other people who have come into the fullness of God's desire and potential for their expression and come into a fullness of self-sacrifice and a fullness of love. And we call those people saints. So we have Jesus, and we have saints, and we have prophets, and some of them aren't Christian, and they are still full manifestations of God's love for us. So keep on looking for the saints in your lives. Next question. Why did the people who wrote the Bible make it so complicated? Why didn't they just write down what really happened instead of making up stories? Well, okay, I love stories, but let me try to respond to that first question. I want you to think of like a magazine, like Time magazine, People magazine. And you notice that inside the pages of that magazine, you have editorial comments, you have commentary, and you have news stories, and you have profile pieces, and sometimes you might see poetry, sometimes you might see cartoons, sometimes you might see sports stories. You have all kinds of different literature in even just magazines you pick up off the rack. Well, you have to look at the Bible in the same way. It's a collection of 66 different books, and a lot of those are about different literary genres, some of which is poetry, some of which is history, some of which are letters, and we only get to see half of the male correspondence in those letters, right? So you have a lot of different kinds of literature that is within a Bible that covers thousands of years of history. If we think about Genesis as being comprised of stories that were told around campfires for thousands of years, and then we have hundreds of years before all of the teachings that the Jewish people got finally coalesced into the Leviticus codes and some of those other stories. So the Bible is not just one book. It's a collection of a lot of different kinds of literature, and it's written into particular times and particular places. So just like if you were to read something today about the Grizz had a great game and we did the wave, we would know what that meant, but people 100 years ago wouldn't. And people 100 years from now wouldn't. And they kind of they would have to make it up. They'd have to kind of do some research into the historical and cultural setting of that statement. We have to do the same thing with the Bible, to see what the words meant, what the stories meant, and why they were told that way. Next question. What about God and the Big Bang Theory? Yes. I'll put it out there as directly as I can. There is no conflict between science and religion. There isn't. There are different ways that we tell stories and different ways that we understand the world. So when we tell the story about the Big Bang as starting our universe, which is a theory, but a pretty good one, and we tell the story of Genesis, we're not telling stories in competition with each other. One story, the story of the Big Bang, tells a story of how. The story of Genesis tells a story of why God created and it was good. So no conflict between science and faith. Study both. Study them well. Next question. Why doesn't God make bad things stop? Oh, this is a tough thing because, whenever we see people suffer, whenever we ourselves are suffering, we pray for an end. And sometimes it feels like those prayers get answered, and sometimes it feels like those prayers get ignored. But I tell you what, instead of asking why God doesn't do something, I ask, why don't we? Because we are told that we're the hands and the feet, we're the heart of Christ in the world. And so whenever people are suffering, it's not about looking for the external, right? The external God to come down. The question is, how can we be more compassionate and kind and generous and creative? And how can we take our role in stopping suffering or in meeting those people who are suffering? Okay? Next question. There are so many religions. How can they all be right? Gosh, I don't know that any of them are all right in all things at all the time. What we're looking for when we look at different religious traditions, and I really love the idea of Pastor Janice's wagon wheel, different spokes that head toward the center. We're looking for areas of congruence or areas where there's overlap. All the major world religions talk about compassion. All of them talk about forgiveness in one way or another. All of them talk about becoming more generous and more kind. See, what we have with Jesus is we have our path and we have our tradition. And we think that there are truths there because the truths around God's love surpassing all things, even death, to lead to greater hope, is a story that resonates and lives for us. So when it comes to the major religions, there's probably some bit of rightness, some bit of correctness in all of them. And all of them probably have some failures too, including our own. But the path of being on this journey and discovering those truths and those correctnesses together, that's what makes life of faith exciting. Thank you so much for your questions. I look forward to hearing more about them. And here's a commercial. We get to answer these kinds of questions and a bunch more in confirmation. So I hope you're thinking about attending confirmation. It's for anybody 8th grade on up, and it's going to be a great experience. So until next time, peace of Christ and all be with you.